I'm Laura Rodriguez. I'm here to talk to you about supporting dark mode in our mobile apps. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a software engineer at DoorDash. I currently work as a mobile tech lead in the logistics organization within DoorDash. I primarily code on iOS, though I do have some experience with Android, as well as some experience with web using React. I'm also a hackathon enthusiast. I've participated in multiple hackathons inside the company, as well as in previous companies and other events. And other than that, I am an avid hiker and traveler. I look forward to being able to do that, hopefully in the next year. So let's talk about dark mode. And with that, I'll start with a public service announcement about your app users. And that is that a lot of them already use dark mode in other apps, and they will expect your app to support it. And it's worth it to say one more time that a lot of your current users, either users that are already using your app or future users, if you're in the middle of developing an app that is not released to production, they already use dark mode in many apps on the daily. And your app will most certainly be incomplete without it. They will definitely expect this experience to be part of it. So I think, dark mode is cool, it looks great, but why is it really important? In my mind, there are three main reasons why it is integral to any mobile experience and really any UI experience. But focusing here on mobile a little bit, the first one is around readability, especially in low light environments. Your users won't be able to read the content you show them. It will just be a blinding white screen, and it's going to be a really bad user experience. And that takes us to my second point here, which is increased eye strain, especially if your users use your app at night or for long periods of time. Having that blinding white light can result in dry eyes, itchy eyes, headaches, dizziness, and just an overall bad experience with your app. And so that all great reasons there to do dark mode. And the last point there that I want to make is around battery life. Some studies have shown that dark mode can increase battery life by as much as 60%, especially in OLED screens. And a lot of the newer devices use these. So no shortage of reasons to support dark mode in your app. So with that, let me tell you the story of how we launched dark mode in our driver apps, and we call them Dasher apps, driver Dasher. And it all started with a hackathon. We heard a lot of feedback from our Dashers in various feedback channels, especially Dashers doing deliveries at night or working for long hours. They were having a lot of issues reading the information in the screen. And this is very important information. This is information about the orders that they're picking up or where they're supposed to be dropping off, new orders that they get in the screen, especially while driving and it's dark out. It was just a blinding white light. And it was just not a good user experience. At the same time, there's a lot of momentum to have dark mode in your apps. Especially because both iOS as well as Android have supported dark mode for the past couple of releases. The image I have here is of a Dasher driving at night and just being blinded by the white screen, just unable to read anything. So with that, I want to show you the prototype that we came up with during the hackathon. And you can see the Dasher app here adapting to light conditions. Light screen when it's bright outside, and then when it turns dark, then it will turn the screen dark. And as you can see, it's not just inverted white and black colors. It's a lot more involved than that. There's different tones of gray and different tones of various colors on the screen just to optimize the readability for the ambience. So with that, during the hackathon, we won the #1 prize in the accessibility category. And we also really, really like this experience. And we think very strongly that it will actually be a really good experience to bring for all the Dashers. But we wanted to make sure to support dark mode in a scalable fashion, not just supporting current features in the current state, but really making sure that any new feature that is developed in the Dasher app supports dark mode out of the box. For this, we partnered with our design experts to make sure that we do this through themings. And we created different themes for both light as well as dark mode. And this meant really a huge overhaul in the code bases for both iOS and Android. But it was great because at the end, we were able to ship this experience to both iOS and Android Dashers. And I want to show you a demo of what the experience looks like today. So the before, this is sort of a before and after experience. Before is the image we had seen of that blinding white light when the Dasher is driving. And now with the new experience, you can see that the app adapts to night conditions and it turns into dark mode. So now Dashers, when they're driving at night, it feels a lot better. They don't have to squint their eyes and they don't have to try so hard to find out where their next order is coming from or where they're supposed to go to. It's just much, much easier. And it's an overall much, much better user experience. So a lot of great reasons to use dark mode. So let's move on to how you can support dark mode in your app. And in my mind, this is a 3-step process. The first step is to go through a full audit of all of your screens in the app and decide what each screen should look like, both in light as well as in dark mode. And this is where you might actually be spending most of your time in this whole process, is just making sure that you can capture every single screen and figure out what it should look like in both conditions. Once you have that, you can create all the themes that you need using a semantic architecture to describe the UI rather than hard-coded colors. And if you are getting a little bit lost, don't worry, I'll dive deeper into what this all means in the next slide. But once you have that done, then you can move on to your mobile apps and focus on replacing all the hard-coded UI in there so that the apps can now leverage the themes and they will adapt their appearance accordingly. So let's talk about DLS and themes. I've mentioned DLS a few times now, so it's worth to describe what it really is. DLS stands for Design Language System, and it just moves us away from hard-coded colors and allows us to build the abstractions based on how the colors are used. So if you look at the images on this slide, the top image describes that audit I was talking about earlier, where we looked at every single screen and decided what it should look like, both in light and dark mode. And this is certainly a subset of all the screens that we have in the app, but this should give you the idea of the scale of the work involved. Moving on to talking about what themes are, it's best described as an example. So at the bottom on the left, you can see a screenshot of the Dasher app. And there's a label there for 1475, where it's a dollar amount. And that's the primary focus on that screen. And you can see that that label used to be hard-coded to a color that was E7, E7, E7. But you can semantically define this as being primary text on the screen. So that could be called text primary. So once you define that DLS semantic, and that is what DLS is all about, then you can move on to the translation of what does this mean when I'm in light mode and what does this mean when I'm in dark mode. And as you can see, it will be a different color based on which appearance I'm at. And of course, there could be other themes that you might want to support in the future. So text primary could end up being green or red or any other color that is appropriate for the specific theme that you're trying to support. So once you have all the semantics, all the audit done, and you know what each screen is supposed to look like, you can move on to focusing on your mobile apps. And let's start by talking about the iOS app. The first step that you will want to take is to make sure that your app is not hard-coded for light mode. Depending on how long your app has been out, it's possible that at some point it was hard-coded to light mode. And it would be, it's something that you have to make sure that you can flip that bit in your info.plist just to make sure that your app will be adapting to the appearance changes. Once you have that, I would recommend listing all the colors that you're using in the app and their context. And to give you an example, for you would say things like, well, I'm using black in a button's text. So once you have all the context and all the colors, you can work on having your conversion chart. And this is where you would think, well, what does this mean from a DLS semantic? In our example, black color used in a button's text would translate to button primary foreground. And that has different values depending on whether it's in light or in dark mode. So once you have that conversion chart, at that point, you're ready to go back to your app and make all the necessary changes to leverage those semantics and replace all of the hard-coded colors. And don't forget about the zip files. It can be tricky to do this as well because they might actually not show up in Xcode. So I think we used Visual Studio to just make sure like everything works well and everything is replaced properly. And the last point I want to make is to just make sure that everyone in your team starts referencing all of these DLS semantics. For the most part, while you're doing all of this work, there's other features that are already been worked on. So you want to make sure that everybody starts doing that as early as possible. And instead of referencing hard-coded colors or helper libraries or extensions that could have been helpful at some point, but are now just detrimental to all of the dark mode efforts. So after you do all of that, even after all of that, you might end up with a screen that looks like this, the one on the right. I think there's a lot going on in the screen, but it looks like my background color should be light gray, and then there's like a portion that's just like too black, and then there's another one that's just too bright. And the reason for this is UIKit's system colors. Now, UIKit tries to be helpful. So if you don't set a color for an element, it will default to a standard color, depending on what element that is. So labels will have one color, backgrounds will have a different color, and it will automatically transition these colors for appearance changes between light and dark mode. But unfortunately, that won't follow your theme. So there's a background color there that is just too dark. And so we need to make sure that every color follows the appropriate semantic that we have defined for that. And that really takes us to my first point in terms of the gotchas in this whole process. And that is to make sure that you have every single color defined as a semantic. And this, as you can imagine, can be a super tedious task. The tip that I can offer you there is for testing purposes, you can override your theme. So it returns the same color every single time for every semantic, for example, purple. And so you would expect all of your app to be purple everywhere except for where semantics are not being defined. And that's where you would want to fix it. That's a good tip because this specific part of the effort is very tricky, especially if you have multiple screens with multiple statuses. That can be very tricky. The other point is in making sure that your app seamlessly transforms between light and dark mode as it's open, since a lot of users will have your app open, and then the appearance might transition based on the time of day or the light conditions. Now, the concept of light and dark mode is implemented in UIKit and not in the core animation. So a core animation layer really won't know how to respond to an appearance change. So in this case, we have to just simply pass in an updated color when the trade collection changes. And the last point I want to make is to make sure that you test your app both in light as well as in dark mode. This is a huge overhaul of basically every single screen that you have. So you want to make sure that you look at it and make sure that it looks what it's supposed to look like for every screen and every light condition. Now, switching over to Android, I think there are a lot of common learnings, but let's go over specifics. The first thing you will want to do is make sure that you update the parent theme to leverage day-night. And you can do this whether you're using app compat or material components. It's a similar change. Then after that, you'll want to have a colors.xml within the values night directory. And what this will do is it will hold the mapping between a semantic color and the RGB color. For example, a DLS primary, background primary would be 191919 when it's in dark mode. Once you have that, you can create the themes file to map each item type to its corresponding DLS theme. And this is where you can say, my window background should have a DLS background primary. And then the system, based on the light conditions, will pull that RGB color from either the values or the values night directory. Once you have all of that, you can update all of your colors in all of your layouts to leverage the new theme. And the point here I want to make is if you have any colors that need to be updated dynamically, you need to make sure to use the right activity context to get the themes instead of the application context, which could be stale. Two additional points I want to make for Android. And the first one is you'll have to evaluate whether you need to support older OS devices, Android 9 and earlier, depending on where your users you're at. You might need to support that, and that would involve additional work required to do this, maybe in the form of an in-app toggle or something like that. The other point is around Google Maps, and this also applies to iOS. If you're using Google Maps on iOS, you'll need to pass in a map styling, which is a JSON object, to make sure that dark mode is supported. And you can refer to Google Docs for this info. I think we use Map Wizard. Other than that, again, test your app, both in light and dark mode. This is a huge overhaul of how your app looks like. So to conclude, I want to leave you with 3 key takeaways of this talk. And the first one being supporting dark mode is not optional. It is definitely a requirement to having a delightful user experience. And it's not just about like looking good, but there are a lot of like safety concerns with it. I think the best way to support this is through a strong design language system, scalable UI, and reusable themes, and moving away from single-use hard-coded UI. And last point around here is making sure to test your entire app, every single screen, both light and dark mode, and allow plenty of time for that. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening in. Thank you so much to Women Who Code and all the organizers, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thanks to Laura there.